On Friday week, there will be a referendum on the same date as the presidential election to decide whether or not we can blaspheme or not blaspheme. The public are going to be asked whether we should remove the issue of blasphemy from the Constitution. Currently, under Irish law, saying or publishing something blasphemous is a criminal offence, meaning that it is currently punishable by law. And what the law states is that there is a fine possible to impose on somebody up to €25,000. And to discuss the pros and the cons of keeping blasphemy in the Constitution, or indeed binning it, I'm joined in studio by the Chairperson of Atheist Ireland, Michael Nugent, and on the line by Colum Kenny, Emeritus Professor of Journalism at DCU. We want to kind of lay out the stall, the pros and the cons and the for and against arguments. So I might come to you first, Michael. Why do you believe that the constitutional clause on blasphemy should be removed from the Constitution?
Well, firstly, it's anachronistic. It was brought in 1937 when Ireland was a very different country. Every organisation that has, or body that has reviewed the Constitution since then has recommended that it be removed. That goes back to the Constitutional Review Group chaired by T.K. Whittaker in the 1990s, the Law Reform Commission before that, All-Party Committee in the Oireachtas. If we bring ourselves up to today, the Catholic Church says it's obsolete. The Protestant churches say that it's obsolete. Atheist Ireland went to the United Nations last year when Pakistan was being questioned about its human rights record, along with the Evangelical Alliance and the Ahmadi Muslims of Ireland, saying that the blasphemy laws there are abusing people's rights. And the Organisation of Islamic States like to point to the Irish law, because we have a new statutory law passed just a few years ago as an example of Western hypocrisy in telling them to stop using blasphemy laws. That's so that's an international reason. It breaches our international human rights obligations. The United Nations Human Rights Committee has been telling us for decades that we need to remove it because it's incompatible with our human rights obligations. And it also has a practical effect within Ireland. Although it hasn't been formally enforced, we know from a direct experience that some broadcast media and print publications will choose to self-censor themselves because they simply don't want to get involved in even the possibility of a blasphemy case, whether or not they would be likely to win it. So those are essentially the three reasons that it's anachronistic, it's harmful in terms of self-censorship of the media within Ireland, and it is harmful to our reputation internationally, and breaches our human rights obligations. It's also, as a final thing, it's also a silly kind of concept, that it's a kind of medieval concept, and the only time that blasphemy has really been used in Ireland in my lifetime was when the censorship board banned Monty Python's Life of Brian for blasphemy.
Okay. Let me bring you in, Colum. You heard what Michael had to say there. It's anachronistic. It breaches our human rights. It imposes a form of censorship on free speech. Why do you think we should keep the blasphemy clause in the Constitution?
I think we should vote no, because there's a lot more important issues that could be addressed in this referendum, and I have to say, that sounded more like 23 than 3 reasons. I can't deal with everything Michael said, but I want to take up something he said that's been said repeatedly, and unfortunately the government has sort of outsourced this campaign to Atheist Ireland, which has a point of view which is perfectly reasonable, but it's not the government's position. The Convention on the Constitution did not recommend this provision simply be taken out of the Constitution. It proposed it be replaced, and that proposal was the one supported by the United Nations. So it's simply not correct. Replaced with what, Colum? Replaced with a provision protecting people against hate speech in relation to religion particularly. And there was a large majority vote in favour of that. And when the government first welcomed the report of the Convention on the Constitution, it pointed out that 53% to 38% the Convention had voted that the provision be replaced with a new general provision to include incitement to religious hatred. In addition, that would be in addition to our existing hate speech legislation. Okay. At a time of international rancour like we have now, what is the government doing, going out of its way to make it easier to be rancorous and to have hate speech? The fact of the matter is, there are more important things we could be doing. It's only 18 months since the Convention of the Constitution recommended, for example, votes for immigrants overseas in presidential elections, and the Taoiseach then said that was a profoundly important recommendation, and we were out of step with 120 other countries. Can you think of something more perfect for the day of the presidential election than to have had a vote on that.
I actually totally take your point, Colum, that this may not be in terms of our country's priorities, it may not be the most important thing. But nonetheless, accepting the fact that we are going to vote on it on Friday week, is there much real argument for keeping something on blasphemy in our laws, that if I said here today something that flew in the face of God on air, that I could be sued or prosecuted for a fine of €25,000? Is there really much to support that as being a good position?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of things. First of all, I don't think we have to take what's given by the government. They're setting an agenda which is distorting the relatively important things we could be considering. On free speech alone, I simply do not accept their self-censorship in relation to this provision. The blasphemy provision is very broad sweeping. There are all kinds of exceptions. All it ensures is that people who deliberately set out to be abusive and to cause offence to people who hold sacred certain matters are checked in doing that. And there's all kinds of offences, as you well know, and most broadcasters well know, for genuine literary, artistic, political, scientific or academic reasons that you could claim. Nobody's ever been prosecuted under this. I have seen no evidence.
Doesn't mean that they couldn't be, though.
They couldn't be prosecuted in an unreasonable fashion. And I mean, this is actually part of the issue. We're sending some kind of a signal here for some reason that has to do with the government, I think, making gestures. I don't think we should toy with the Constitution. I think this is not the first time the government's done it. I think people should not accept changes to the Constitution that are not well thought out and argued. This could do more harm than good in some respects. It could make it easier to have more of the kind of hate speech that we're seeing online. And I think people shouldn't be presented with something like this without asking what might the government be doing instead of it. We could be strengthening our freedom of speech in Ireland, for instance, by making it easier for people to resist facetious defamation actions. They are genuinely, there's a lot of evidence that, for instance, defamation by the powerful and the mighty are chilling free speech. You can't, for instance, also as a citizen easily go to court to assert your freedom of information rights and other rights against organisations.
And I do accept that there are other things that in the Constitution that I would have agreed with you that might be more, I suppose, important to sort out. But they're not they're not going to be on the ballot paper on Friday week. Let me bring Michael back in. You heard what Colum has to say, that if we remove this, we're going to make hate speech, in fact, easier for people to engage in, and we have a lot of that, particularly online, people saying very, very harsh, very nasty things. You see all sorts of unfiltered stuff, I suppose, in the occasionally cesspit of social media. Does Colum not make a point that we shouldn't be encouraging hate speech, and maybe that the blasphemy laws are a bulwark against that?
Well, blasphemy laws are different to hate laws. We already have laws against incitement to religious hatred, and the Venice Commission, which is the body that advises Council of Europe governments on constitutional issues, has recommended that there should be laws against incitement to religious hatred because those laws protect people, but that there shouldn't be laws against blasphemy because those laws protect ideas. Now, what I think might be useful, because Colin went through a number of issues. If I'll just briefly address some of those issues. In terms of whether there are more important issues, there may well be, but this is the one we're voting on. In terms of the government outsourcing the campaign to Atheist Ireland, I would love to see the political parties doing more in terms of promoting it. But the government's position is identical to our position. If you look at the Dáil speeches when it was being made, the Minister for Justice made exactly the same arguments that we're making now. In terms of the Constitutional Convention, the Convention made two different votes. One was whether it should stay as it is. In other words, whether it should be gone or not. And
as it is, Michael, are the important words.
Exactly. Sorry, I didn't interrupt you, Colum. And so
I'm just correcting what you're saying.
Colum, let Michael finish.
Yeah,
Go on, Michael,
Colum, you're not
point.
correcting me. I said the government said, that the Commission said that it should stay as it is, and you then interrupted me to tell me what I just said.
Let's stay on the point.
On that issue, on that vote, 60% of the convention said that it shouldn't stay as it is. They then had a separate vote as to what should happen if it wasn't to stay as it is, and on that, a slight majority voted that it should be replaced by an incitement to religious hatred. Now, the government decided not to go with that second recommendation, for the same reasons we've just learned over the last decade or more than a decade on the abortion issues, that there are some issues that are better dealt with in legislation rather than put into the Constitution. The United Nations did not just say that we should do it because of the Constitutional Convention. They've been telling us since 1993 that we need to remove it. And if you look, we can't go into the detail now, but the nuance of the United Nations comment on the current one is clear if you read that. And finally, with regard to the issue of don't accept that there is self-censorship, I have personally been told before going on to RTE programmes, don't say anything that breaches the blasphemy law. The NUJ has said the same thing. We have seen articles being censored or edited by newspapers because they have what we considered quite innocuous comments that they felt some of their conservative readers might consider to be blasphemous. So that is factually happening. And on the final issue, in terms of that you don't think that it's possible, Colum, I mean, back in 1990, in 2009, when the bill came in first, and it was around the same time that the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland was being established, you said at the time that the reference in the Broadcasting Authority Act to causing offence comes hot on the heels of the government's controversial new blasphemy provision and may have a chilling effect on some broadcasters, and that causing offence can be a constitutional right. So you seem to have changed your opinion pretty radically since then.
Well, in fairness, he's entitled to change his opinion.
Well, I haven't actually, Ciara. And can I just come back on the point? I think in many ways Michael has made my point. The Constitutional Convention recommended replacing the present provision. And actually what the observations of the United Nations Human Rights Committee made in 2014 on the 19th of August said, and I'm quoting it, the state parties should consider removing the prohibition on blasphemy of the Constitution as recommended by the Convention on the Constitution. And what the Convention on the Constitution recommended was actually its replacement. That's why the words in the vote on blasphemy, keeping it as it is important, because they didn't want to kept it as it is. They wanted it improved, and the vote was not narrow. It was 53% to 38% that called for it to be replaced. So this government is not doing what the Convention on the Constitution said on blasphemy. It's failing to bring forward an amendment on women in the Constitution that it promised to do on the same day, and it's utterly failing people who live abroad. And I'm not going to accept the agenda setting of this government, and I would say people should vote no. If they think the Constitution is being toyed with, if they're unsure of the benefits of this provision, I think they should vote no and make the government make a stronger case. Where is the government? Where are the government ministers arguing this? Why are they not prepared to debate?
Lots of our listeners have views on this too. They're saying, do we have hate crimes? If someone says something that would qualify as blasphemy, it would also qualify as hate speech. Why do we need blasphemy laws if we have hate speech laws? Someone else says, Ciara, your guest is confusing the issue. Hate speech law is completely different to blasphemy laws. And someone else says, Ciara, our blasphemy laws provide justification to the likes of the Charlie Hebdo killers. It has to be repealed. No one has the right not to be offended. And that's from Ed. Very little support for keeping it, Colum.
We'll see.
We will see.
I mean, I think a lot of people, to be quite honest, I wondered how many people are even aware of the fact they're going to be asked to vote on this. And of course, as usual, the actual provision they'll get when they go into the polling booth is not very informative. The way these things get worded, it will not explain to you. You're asked to approve a bill, and all the bill does, incidentally, is remove the word blasphemy from the Constitution. The actual blasphemy law that has been mentioned by Michael in the Defamation Act 2009 stays in place.
All right. Look, thank you both for speaking to me. That is Michael Nugent there, Chairperson of Atheist Ireland, and Colum Kenny, Emeritus Professor of Journalism at DCU.